It began with the grass. Of all the things that could spark chaos in a peaceful retirement community, no one expected it to be the grass in front of Grandpa's house. The neighborhood, Maple Ridge Estates, prided itself on its perfect harmony, a phrase used often by the HOA president, Mrs. Judith Carmichael, who wore pearls to every board meeting and treated the rulebook like scripture. Grandpa had moved to Maple Ridge a year earlier, after Grandma passed away. He wanted peace, quiet, and a little garden to keep busy. He bought the smallest house on Birch Lane, a corner lot with a crooked mailbox and a yard he called his patch of heaven. For a few months, everything was fine. He mowed when he remembered, kept to himself, and baked banana bread for the neighbors. But then, the letter came. It arrived in a crisp white envelope with the HOA's gold embossed logo. Inside, a single sheet of paper listed his violations: grass over 3 inches high, unauthorized garden decorations, and a non-conforming mailbox. It warned him that failure to correct these issues within 10 days would result in fines. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink and arrogance. Grandpa, being Grandpa, didn't take it well. He'd spent his life fixing tractors and painting barns, and now some lady in a blazer was telling him his birdhouse was illegal. He didn't rant or rage, not at first. He just read the letter 3 times, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter beside his coffee cup. The next morning, the war began. First came the lawn mower, or rather, the lack of one. Instead of trimming the grass, Grandpa let it grow higher. By the end of the week, it brushed his knees. He told the mailman it was becoming a prairie, and the mailman laughed, until the HOA sent another warning, this time citing failure to maintain community aesthetic standards. Grandpa framed that one and hung it on his porch. Then came the flamingos. Bright pink, plastic, and impossible to miss. He planted 12 of them across his front yard like soldiers in formation. Each one wore a tiny hand-painted helmet. A small sign in the middle read, "Under new management." Neighbors slowed down as they drove past, torn between amusement and horror. Judith Carmichael was not amused. She marched up his driveway one morning with a clipboard in hand and a frown sharp enough to cut glass. Though no one heard what was said, everyone saw what came next: the new letter taped to his door, this time in bold print, "Final notice." That's when Grandpa's true color showed. The next day, his garage door opened early in the morning, and the sound of hammering echoed down Birch Lane. He built a wooden post by his driveway and mounted a homemade sign that read, in shaky black paint, "Private property. HOA trespassers will be photographed and mocked." By sunset, word had spread. Half the neighborhood thought he was hilarious. The other half whispered about disruptive elements. The HOA scheduled an emergency meeting. Grandpa wasn't invited, but he showed up anyway, lawn chair in hand, sitting just outside the clubhouse windows, sipping lemonade. By the end of the week, the fines began to pile up: $50 for the flamingos, $100 for the sign, $200 for defiance of community standards. It was supposed to break him. Instead, it fueled him. Because Grandpa had a plan, no one knew it yet, but the old man on Birch Lane was just getting started. The grass, the flamingos, even the sign, they were only the beginning. Beneath the calm smile and gentle shuffle was a storm waiting to break, and when it did, Maple Ridge would never be the same again. The next phase began quietly, almost too quietly for Maple Ridge Estates. After the third fine notice and a threat of legal action, most people would have given up. But Grandpa wasn't most people. He'd once rebuilt a tractor engine using spare lawnmower parts and a coffee can. He had patience, stubbornness, and, most importantly, time. Within a week, strange things started happening around Birch Lane. The first clue came when Mrs. Carmichael's sprinkler system suddenly began watering the sidewalk instead of her roses. Then, the next morning, the HOA's neatly painted sign, the one that read "Pride in every lawn," had been replaced with a hand-painted version reading "Petty in every policy." No one saw who did it, but the neighborhood suspected. Every evening, Grandpa could be found sitting on his porch with a small notebook and a satisfied look, as though he were documenting the progress of a secret mission. And, in a way, he was. Operation Maple Rebellion had begun. It started as a solo act. Grandpa researched the HOA bylaws meticulously, discovering that many of the rules contradicted one another. He realized that the same section of the code that prohibited unauthorized decorations also allowed seasonal lawn displays of reasonable size. So he began rotating his decorations daily. Monday was flamingos. Tuesday was garden gnomes. Wednesday was inflatable turkeys, even though it was nowhere near Thanksgiving. Every morning, a new seasonal display appeared. The HOA couldn't keep up. The neighbors began to notice. Some, at first, shook their heads in disapproval, but others started to smile when they passed his house. Then one day, a few more pink flamingos appeared, not in Grandpa's yard, but scattered around the neighborhood. At first just one or two, then dozens. They popped up on lawns like mushrooms after rain. It was no longer just Grandpa versus the HOA. It was Maple Ridge versus its own rulebook. By the second week, the rebellion had spread to garden flags, porch lights, and even mailboxes. Someone painted their mailbox sky blue with clouds. Another replaced their grass with native wildflowers, technically violating Section 8, Clause 4, Subsection B, but making the street look far more colorful. The HOA board was furious. They issued mass citations, tried to enforce fines, even hired a private security company to patrol at night. But the residents had found a loophole. The HOA rules required unanimous board approval to collect penalties, and 2 members had quietly resigned after being caught laughing at Grandpa's antics. The balance of power had shifted. Grandpa, however, stayed calm through it all. He didn't gloat, didn't argue, didn't post online rants like some of his new allies did. He just kept tending to his lawn, or what was left of it. The grass had grown into a soft meadow filled with daisies and clover, a tiny ecosystem humming with bees. He called it the People's Prairie, and the name stuck. The final straw came when the HOA announced a mandatory neighborhood cleanup day. Homeowners were ordered to trim, repaint, and remove all non-compliant items. Grandpa's name was listed first. He spent the night before that event hammering in something new. A flagpole. By dawn, a flag waved above his house, an old bedsheet painted with a flamingo wearing a crown. Beneath it, a wooden sign read, "We, the residents of Maple Ridge, reject tyranny and embrace lawn freedom." That morning, dozens of neighbors refused to participate in the cleanup. Instead, they gathered around Grandpa's house with coffee and pastries, laughing, taking photos, and cheering quietly whenever another HOA enforcer walked by in disbelief. Mrs. Carmichael appeared soon after, clipboard in hand, lips pressed thin. She looked around at the crowd, the flags, the flowers, and for the first time, she realized the community she'd controlled for years no longer feared her. The rebellion had gone public, but what no one knew yet was that Grandpa had received another letter that very morning, one that didn't come from the HOA. It came from a local news outlet. Someone had leaked the story, and now a reporter wanted to feature the flamingo revolt of Maple Ridge on the evening broadcast. Grandpa read it twice, smiled, and set the letter beside his lemonade. He didn't know it yet, but his quiet war had just become national news. By the time the news van rolled into Maple Ridge Estates, the neighborhood no longer looked like a retirement community. It looked like a movement. Pink flamingos dotted almost every yard, banners hung from porches, and people who hadn't spoken to one another in years were suddenly chatting over lemonade and lawn chairs. Grandpa's house, the epicenter of the uprising, had become a local landmark. Cars slowed down to take photos. Kids pointed out the crowned flamingo flag waving proudly over the People's Prairie. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Grandpa sat calmly on his porch, carving another wooden sign. The HOA tried to fight back. Mrs. Carmichael sent urgent emails warning that unauthorized media presence violated community privacy rules. She threatened legal action, called emergency meetings, and even tried to cancel the neighborhood Wi-Fi service to stop the spread of videos. But it was too late. The internet had taken hold. Within 24 hours, a local story became a viral phenomenon. The flamingo revolt hit social media feeds everywhere. Viewers loved it. The peaceful defiance, the petty rules, the pink birds standing tall against bureaucracy. Grandpa, unwittingly, had become the face of resistance against petty authority. Comments flooded in from across the country. Stories of other HOAs, other fights, other people tired of being told what color they could paint their doors. The following weekend, reporters, influencers, and curious visitors showed up at Maple Ridge. The HOA couldn't control the narrative anymore. They couldn't fine every visitor or censor every video. For the first time in years, the power had shifted completely away from them. Mrs. Carmichael, however, wasn't done. She prepared one last act of retaliation, an official cease and desist letter addressed to Grandpa. It claimed that he owed $7,200 in fines, that he was in material breach of community standards, and that legal proceedings were being considered. The letter was printed on embossed paper, sealed with the HOA's logo, and delivered personally by her, as though she were presenting royal decree. Grandpa accepted it quietly. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He just folded the paper, walked back inside, and returned a few minutes later holding a thick manila folder. Inside were copies of every rule violation he'd ever received, annotated, cross-referenced, and neatly organized. On top, a handwritten letter addressed to all residents of Maple Ridge. That night, every mailbox in the neighborhood received a copy. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was simply factual. Grandpa had gone through the bylaws line by line, pointing out inconsistencies, illegal provisions, and rules that violated state housing laws. He'd highlighted sections where the HOA had overstepped its authority and cited multiple cases where they'd misused funds collected from residents. The next morning, the document spread like wildfire. Someone uploaded it online, where lawyers, housing advocates, and even a few ex-HOA board members began weighing in. Within days, an official investigation was launched into Maple Ridge Estate's finances. The board fractured almost instantly. 2 members resigned, citing ethical concerns. Another admitted to signing off on citations they'd never read. And at the center of it all stood Mrs. Carmichael, the self-proclaimed guardian of Maple Ridge Order, watching as the empire she'd built crumbled under the weight of its own paperwork. Weeks passed. The investigation concluded quietly, but its impact echoed for months. Mrs. Carmichael stepped down, citing health reasons. The fines were rescinded. The bylaws were rewritten by a temporary committee, one that, for the first time, included residents instead of board appointees. The community that had once prided itself on uniformity had rediscovered something far better: individuality. As for Grandpa, he never bragged about what happened. He didn't even attend the first official Maple Ridge community picnic that the new board hosted to celebrate their fresh start. Instead, he stayed home, tending to his garden, which by then had become a small paradise of wildflowers, bees, and, of course, flamingos. Sometimes, new residents would stop by and ask him how it all began. He'd smile faintly, glance at the framed HOA violation letter still hanging by his porch, and then at the flagpole swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't about rebellion, not really. It was about dignity, about drawing a line in the neatly trimmed grass and saying, enough. In the end, Maple Ridge didn't just survive the flamingo revolt, it grew because of it. The lawns were no longer identical. The mailboxes came in every color imaginable. And if you drove down Birch Lane on a sunny afternoon, you'd still see that old crown flamingo standing tall, watching over the quiet neighborhood that once tried to outlaw it. Peace had returned, but this time, it was on their own terms.